4 people saw my husband's lover push me. 4 people saw the taxi hit me. 4 people watched my husband, Julian, lean over my bleeding body and whisper, "You deserved this." What he did not know was that those 4 witnesses were not strangers. They were my insurance policy. The ballroom at the Pierre was suffocating, a sea of bespoke suits and calculated smiles. This was the annual Aetherius Ventures Gala, Julian's victory lap. My husband, Julian Price, had built this venture capital firm from nothing, or so the narrative went. I, Ilara Reyes, his 35-year-old wife and a financial strategist myself, knew the real story. I knew that nothing included a hefty seed investment from my family trust. I smoothed my hands over the silk covering my stomach. 5 months. 5 months pregnant after 2 miscarriages and a round of IVF that had nearly broken me. This baby was my miracle, my entire world compressed into a tiny, fluttering life I was desperate to protect. Julian was across the room, charming a circle of tech billionaires. He was magnetic, a perfect picture of the devoted husband. Every few minutes, his eyes would find mine, and he'd flash that brilliant, camera-ready smile. He even blew me a kiss. The investors lapped it up. See a family man, a stable investment. But his smile was a fraction too tight, and his eyes kept sliding, just for a second, past me to a woman standing near the bar. Sophie Keller, the new chief counsel for Aetherius. She was sharp in every sense of the word. A severe black dress, hair pulled into a punishingly tight bun, and eyes that seemed to dissect everyone they landed on. She was ambitious, and she didn't bother to hide it. I watched, trying to breathe through the sudden tightness in my chest as she approached Julian's circle. She listened for a moment. Then, with a familiarity that felt like a physical blow, she reached up and straightened Julian's tie. Not a friendly pat. A slow, deliberate adjustment. A gesture of ownership. She did it right in front of me. Right in front of his investors. Julian didn't flinch. He just smiled down at her. A private, intimate smile that wasn't meant for me. My stomach churned with something far worse than pregnancy nausea. I needed air. I needed to be anywhere else. Murmuring an excuse about needing to rest my feet to a sympathetic older woman, I slipped out of the ballroom and into the blessedly quiet adjoining lobby. The lobby was all cool marble and muted light, a stark contrast to the oppressive heat of the gala. I sank onto a velvet settee, closing my eyes, one hand protectively on my belly. I just needed 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes to get my mask back on. That's when I heard their voices. They were in an alcove just around the corner, hidden by a massive floral arrangement, their words sharp and clear in the quiet space. It was Julian and Sophie. "We have to accelerate phase 2, Sophie said, her voice a low, urgent hiss. "The window is closing." "I know that," Julian snapped. Not the charming, warm voice from the ballroom. This was cold, hard. Her mother will never sign over the trust if she knows what we're doing. Sophie pressed. My blood went cold. My mother. My trust. And the pregnancy. Ilara being pregnant complicates things. It adds a variable. There was a pause. I held my breath, my heart hammering against my ribs. Then Julian spoke, and his words shattered my world. "The pregnancy is a manageable risk," he said, as if discussing a fluctuating stock price. "It's a complication, not a barrier. As long as she signs the new proxy documents, we get controlling interest. Her mother will be locked out for good. We just need her signature." My signature. They were talking about me, not as a wife, not as the mother of his child, but as her. A variable. A manageable risk. My fingers went numb. The beaded clutch I was holding, the one Julian had bought me for our anniversary, slipped from my grasp. It hit the marble floor with a sharp, echoing clatter that sounded as loud as a gunshot in the silence. The whispering stopped instantly. A second later, They appeared from around the corner. Julian's face was a mask of practiced concern, his eyes wide. "Elara, honey, what are you doing out here? Are you all right? You look pale." He rushed toward me, hands outstretched, the perfect, worried husband. But I wasn't looking at him. I was looking at Sophie Keller. She made no attempt to hide her expression. Her eyes were chips of ice, boring into me with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. It was the look of a predator whose prey had just stumbled into the trap prematurely. "I just needed some air," I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. Julian helped me up, his touch feeling like a burn. "Let's get you home. You're overdoing it. It's not good for the baby." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. And as he led me away, I could feel Sophie's stare on my back, cold and sharp as a knife. In the car on the way back to the penthouse, Julian kept his hand on my knee, rubbing soothing circles. The gesture felt proprietary, not protective. "I'm sorry you heard that, Elara," he said, his voice dripping with faux sincerity. "It's just this hostile takeover attempt. It's messy. Sophie was just outlining the worst-case scenario. You know how lawyers are, all doom and gloom." "A hostile takeover?" I asked, keeping my voice intentionally weak, playing the part of the confused, pregnant wife. "Exactly. We have to be aggressive. Phase 2 is just our counter-strategy. I didn't want to worry you with it. Not in your condition." I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window. "Of course. I understand, Julian. I trust you. I'm so tired." He kissed my temple. "Get some rest. I'll handle everything." I let him lead me to our bed, let him pull the covers over me. I pretended to fall asleep. The moment his breathing evened out into a deep rhythm, I slipped out of the covers. My real work began at 2 a.m, in my home office, with only the glow of my monitors for light. I'm not just a strategist. I'm a forensic analyst. My mind sees patterns in data the way others see faces in a crowd. Julian knew I was smart, but he believed his charm was a shield. He underestimated me. I started with Aetherius Ventures. I didn't need his passwords. My credentials as a senior advisor, though rarely used, were still active. I bypassed the surface-level ledgers and dove straight into the encrypted outflow accounts. It took me less than an hour to find it, a series of massive, repeated payments. They were classified as consulting fees, a laughably transparent label for a slush fund. The recipient was a holding company I'd never heard of, Serpentis Holdings. A quick search showed it was a shell corporation, registered in Delaware just 6 months prior. Anonymous, untraceable, almost. I spent the next 3 hours and $2,000 of my own money on deep-level data tracing. I peeled back the layers of corporate veils, one by one, and then I found it. The name of the sole registered beneficiary of Serpentis Holdings, Sophie Keller. They weren't just sleeping together. They were partners. They were stealing. Millions of dollars had been funneled out of Aetherius and into her pocket. My hands were shaking, but I wasn't done. If they were stealing from the company, they were stealing from me. I checked our personal finances. Julian had been busy. I found an application, submitted 2 weeks ago, to leverage our penthouse for a 7-figure line of credit. He had tried to mortgage our home. My home. The apartment wasn't ours. It was mine. A direct asset from my family's trust. His application had been denied because he lacked the final authority to sign. He needed my signature. The next morning, I tried to test him. Over breakfast, I casually mentioned a market fluctuation. "Julian, I noticed some odd liquidity drains in the Q4 projections. Is that related to the takeover?" His head snapped up. His eyes, usually so warm, were flat and cold. "Elara, I told you not to worry about it." "I'm not worried," I said lightly. "I just thought I could help. I am a strategist, you know." He put his fork down. "Stop. You're stressing. It's not good for the baby. Let me handle my company, and you focus on nesting." or whatever it is you do." The condescension was a slap, but it was the cold dismissal of our child, twisting it into a weapon to silence me, that made my blood run cold. I knew there was one more place to look: his private study, the one he kept locked. I waited until he left for a board meeting that I now knew was a lie. A simple pin was all it took to open the lock. I went to his desk. Tucked beneath a stack of old boating magazines, I found a new folder. It wasn't from our usual insurance broker. It was a new policy, a life insurance policy. On me. It was taken out 3 weeks ago. The coverage amount was $10 million. My breath hitched. I flipped to the last page, to the beneficiary designation: Julian Price, sole beneficiary. I sat on the floor of his study, the papers trembling in my hand. The whispers from the gala replayed in my head. The pregnancy, it complicates things. A manageable risk. Phase 2. This wasn't a simple case of embezzlement. This wasn't just a corporate takeover. This was a plan. A plan to systematically strip me of my assets, starting with the company, then my home. And if I wouldn't sign, the $10 million policy felt like a death warrant. Phase 2 wasn't a business deal. It was the complete removal of Alara Reyes. And my baby, our child, wasn't a joy to him. It was a complication, an obstacle to his payday. He didn't just want my money. He wanted me gone. Fear, I decided, was a useless emotion. It was a paralysis, analysis, strategy, action that was my territory. Julian and Sophie viewed me as a manageable risk. I decided to be an unmanageable one. I waited 2 days, letting the chill in our apartment settle. I played the part of the slightly distant, exhausted, pregnant wife. Then, one evening, I approached him. "Julian," I said, putting my hand on his arm as he loosened his tie. He visibly tensed, but I kept my voice soft. "I've been thinking. You were right. I've been stressed, and I've been distant. I haven't been a supportive partner. I want to change that." He looked at me, suspicion warring with his ego. Ego won. "What do you mean, Alara?" "I want to be involved again. I want to support you. You mentioned those important investors you're trying to convince, the ones from Chicago." "The ones for Phase 2? His eyes narrowed. "What about them?" "Let me host a dinner for them," I said, infusing my voice with warmth. "Not a stuffy gala, an intimate dinner. At per se. We'll show them a united front, a stable, successful family. Let me help you close this deal." A slow smile spread across his face. He saw it. The devoted wife, pregnant and glowing, vouching for her brilliant husband. It was the perfect image. He thought I was a fool, trying to win back his affection. He thought I was weak. "Alara, that's a wonderful idea," he said, kissing my forehead. The touch was repulsive. "I'll arrange it, and yes, Sophie will have to be there. Of course. To go over the legal documents. Of course," I said, smiling brightly. The whole team. The private dining room at Per Se was agonizingly beautiful, overlooking the park. The tension, however, was thick enough to cut with a steak knife. The investors were exactly as Julian had described: older, wealthy, and sharp. Mr. Schmidt was a gruff, old money type from Chicago real estate. Mrs. Wagner was quieter, her jewelry understated, her eyes missing nothing. And then there was Sophie. She wore a white silk blouse, a deliberately provocative choice, and sat next to Julian, her knee occasionally brushing his under the table. She was the picture of the indispensable chief counsel. For the first hour, I was the perfect hostess. I discussed my pregnancy, the nursery colors, the challenges of finding a good preschool in Manhattan. I watched Julian relax. He thought I was safely confined to the domestic sphere. Then the main course arrived. "Julian, you are so brilliant, but you never talk business with me anymore," I said, pouting slightly as I cut into my fish. I turned my smile on Mr. Schmidt. "You're both involved in this new fund, aren't you?" It sounds so exciting. Julian mentioned you're using a special vehicle to handle the more sensitive acquisitions. Julian froze, his wine glass halfway to his lips. It's just standard procedure, Alara, Sophie interjected smoothly, her voice like ice. Oh, I'm sure, I said, blinking innocently. I just find the structuring so fascinating. Julian mentioned a holding company. I think Serpentis Holdings. What a wonderfully dramatic name. Is that one of yours? Mr. Schmidt. I'm always interested in offshore cash flow strategies. Sophie dropped her fork. It clattered loudly on the plate. Mrs. Wagner's head tilted. Serpentis Holdings. I don't believe I'm familiar with that entity. Julian laughed, a forced, sharp sound. Alara, darling, you're mixing things up. We're boring our guests. It's a highly specialized legal entity, Sophie said, her eyes fixed on me. Purely administrative. Far too complex for dinner conversation. Oh, you're right, of course, I said, smiling sweetly. How silly of me. My brain must be addled by the pregnancy. I just get so excited about the numbers. The rest of the meal was strained. Julian and Sophie were visibly rattled. They kept exchanging panicked glances. The investors were polite but cool. I had successfully poisoned the water. Now, it was time to isolate the snake. As the waiter poured coffee, I reached for the cream pitcher. My hand, the one holding my full glass of deep, dark Cabernet, slipped. It was a perfect arc. The entire glass of red wine emptied directly onto the pristine white silk of Sophie Keller's blouse. She gasped, leaping back, but the damage was done. A massive blood-red stain covered her chest. Oh my goodness, I cried, standing up, my hand flying to my mouth. Sophie, I am so sorry. It's this pregnancy. My balance is completely off. I'm just so clumsy. You clumsy bitch, she hissed, low enough that only I could hear. Let me help you, I insisted, grabbing napkins. We have to get that out before it sets. Come on. I steered her toward the restrooms, ignoring Julian's, Ilara, just sit down. The staff will handle it. The moment the heavy door of the marble restroom closed behind us, sealing us in silence, my demeanor changed. Sophie was frantically dabbing at the stain with a wet paper towel, muttering curses. It's not going to come out, I said, my voice flat. She spun around. You did that on purpose. I know you're sleeping with my husband. She stopped dabbing. All the panic vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating amusement. She looked at me, at my swollen belly, and then back at my eyes. A slow, cruel smirk spread across her face. You think this is about sex? She scoffed. God, you really are stupid. You know so little. You know nothing, I retorted, letting my voice rise, sharp with manufactured hysteria. I pushed past her, shoving the heavy restroom door open. I know everything. Sophie, I know about Serpentis. I know you're thieves. I stormed back through the restaurant, past the shocked diners and silent waiters. I didn't care. I wanted this scene. I needed it. Alara, get back here, she yelled, running after me, her silk blouse stained a grotesque dark red. I burst through the main doors of the restaurant and onto the crowded sidewalk of Columbus Circle. The cool night air hit me, a sharp contrast to the heat of my anger. Sophie grabbed my arm, spinning me around. Her face was no longer composed. It was a mask of pure panic. You shut your mouth, she hissed, her grip like steel. I'm going to my mother, I yelled, loud enough for the doorman to turn his head. I was playing the role of the scorned wife, and I was playing it for all it was worth. She's the executor of the trust. She will pull every last cent out of Etheris. You'll have nothing. Julian will have nothing. This was the nerve I needed to hit. This wasn't about the affair. It was about the money. The plan. Their plan? You won't tell anyone, Sophie shrieked, her voice cracking with desperation. Watch me! It was at that exact moment that the main doors opened again. Julian stepped out, followed closely by Mr. Schmidt and Mrs. Wagner. The four of them. They stopped dead, frozen by the sight of us screaming on the curb. They heard her. They heard Sophie's panicked shriek. Sophie saw them. She saw Julian's face, a mask of cold fury. She saw the investors, their expressions hardening with suspicion. She saw everything unraveling. Her eyes darted past me, into the street. A yellow taxi was accelerating toward the intersection. Her desperation curdled into something monstrous. Her face contorted with a rage so pure it was terrifying. "Die!" she screamed, her voice raw. "Die, you and that thing inside you." Her hands slammed into my shoulders. It was a full-bodied shove, fueled by pure, unadulterated hate. I was 5 months pregnant, my center of gravity already unstable. I had no chance. I stumbled backward, off the curb, my ankle twisting. Time seemed to warp. I saw the yellow grille of the taxi, the driver's wide, horrified eyes. I heard the tortured screech of brakes. Then, impact. It wasn't like the movies. It was a brutal, hard thud that sent a shockwave of agony through my entire body. I was thrown back, my head cracking hard against the pavement. The world exploded into white-hot pain. I landed on my back. My first thought, my only thought, was the baby. I instinctively curled, my hands flying to my stomach, a guttural moan tearing from my throat. I could feel something warm and wet spreading beneath my hair. Blood. Through a fog of shock, I looked up. 4 people stood on the sidewalk, silhouetted against the bright lights of the restaurant. Sophie stood triumphant, her chest heaving, the wine stain on her blouse looking black in the darkness. Mr. Schmidt and Mrs. Wagner were statues of pure horror, their hands covering their mouths, their eyes wide with disbelief. And Julian. My husband didn't move. He didn't run to me. He didn't call for help. He simply watched me, his face completely devoid of emotion. Slowly, deliberately, he walked off the curb. He stepped over the puddle of my blood, careful not to soil his expensive shoes. He crouched down, close enough that I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath. He leaned in, his voice a cold, quiet whisper, meant only for me, a final judgment. "I told you not to get in the way." He breathed. "You deserved this." The world began to tunnel. The city lights blurred into streaks. But before I lost consciousness, I locked onto those 4 faces, 2 shocked, 1 victorious, and one that was purely demonic. My husband. My insurance policy was in place. I woke up to the rhythmic, sterile beep of a heart monitor. The smell of antiseptic was sharp in my throat. Every breath was a separate, distinct agony, a fire spreading across my ribs. I was in a private room at Mount Sinai, but it felt more like a vault. The windows were reinforced, and the light was a dull, pearlescent gray. My first, panicked thought was for my baby. I tried to sit up, but a fresh wave of pain shot from my ribs to my skull, and I fell back with a gasp. "The baby is fine." The voice was low, perfectly calm, and more reassuring than any sedative. I turned my head, wincing. My mother, Isabella Reyes, was sitting in a chair beside the bed. She wasn't dressed like a worried mother. She was dressed for war, a tailored navy suit, her hair pulled back in its severe judicial bun. She wasn't just my mother, she was a federal judge, and her face held an expression I knew well, a terrifying Arctic calm. "Your baby is secure, Ilara," she said, her voice quiet but filling the room. "You have 3 broken ribs, a severe concussion, and a hairline fracture in your left ulna. But the baby is a fighter, like its mother." Tears of relief streamed down my face, mixing with the grime and dried blood I could feel on my skin. "Mom." "I've already spoken with the police," she said, as if discussing a court docket. "I have the initial witness statements." She didn't look at a file. She had it all memorized. Mr. Schmidt and Mrs. Wagner were clear. They testified they saw Sophie Keller shove you, unprovoked, into the street. They used the word violent. A small, painful breath of hope entered my lungs. Then it's over. No, she said, her voice sharp. It is not. Julian and Sophie have also given their statements. Their story is that you were hysterical, that you lost your balance, and that you tripped and tragically fell into the path of the taxi. He's lying, I rasped, the words tearing at my throat, as if summoned by my voice. There was a sudden commotion outside my door. A man's voice, raised and furious. Julian's voice. I am her husband. I have a right to see my wife. You can't keep me out, Alara, Alara. Are you in there? I shrank back against the pillows, my heart monitor erupting into a frantic, high-pitched alarm. My mother stood up. She didn't go to the door. She just watched it. I demand to see her, Julian roared. Another voice, deeper and bored, replied, Sir, you will step back behind the line, now. You can't do this. This is my wife. Those are my husband's rights. My mother allowed herself a small, cold smile. He's yelling at 2 marshals from the Southern District, my marshals. He has no rights here. She walked back to my bedside, her gaze locking onto mine. The noise outside faded into a muffled, pathetic tantrum. Alara, she said, her voice softening for the first time. What happened? The truth, not the police report. Tell me. I was weak, but the anger was a steel rod in my spine. It wasn't a shove. Mom, it was an attempted murder. They're in it together. Sophie and Julian, they've been stealing from Etheris. They created a shell company. Serpentis Holdings. My mother's eyes, so like my own, sharpened. Go on. He tried to mortgage the penthouse. He needed my signature. He took out a life insurance policy on me. $10 million. I saw a flicker in her composure, a brief, terrifying flash of maternal rage before the judicial mask snapped back into place. They needed me to sign, I whispered, the tears returning. At the gala. I heard them. They said the pregnancy was a manageable risk. They called it Phase 2. They want the trust. I reached out, my hand trembling, and gripped her wrist. I looked into her eyes. When I was on the ground, bleeding. He didn't help me. He came over. He knelt down, and he whispered. You deserved this. Isabella Reyes said nothing. She simply took my hand, her grip firm, a silent transfer of strength. She sat there for a full minute, the only sound the steadying beep of the heart monitor. The shouting in the hall had stopped. Finally. She stood up. I knew Julian Price was a mistake the moment he valued your trust fund over your mind. But I tolerated him, because you loved him. She walked to the window, looking down at the city lights. He is no longer a mistake. He is a threat, and threats, she said, turning back to me, her face set in stone. Must be neutralized. She pulled out her personal cell phone, not the government-issued one. She began to make calls. Her voice was no longer that of a mother. It was the voice of a judge, of an executioner. Get me Marcus, she said to the person on the other end. I don't care what he's billing. I'm calling in the Kratos Group. Yes. Full financial forensics. Etheris Ventures. Serpentis Holdings. And Julian Price. I want them ruined. They let him in 2 days later. The U.S. Marshals at my door were gone, replaced by a single, impeccably dressed man who introduced himself as Mr. Harrison, an attorney from my mother's firm. He was not a bodyguard. He was a witness, and he sat in the corner of my room with a leather-bound folio, his presence a silent, chilling judgment. The door opened, and Julian rushed in. It was a performance from the first step. He was holding a bouquet of white lilies funeral flowers. I thought, and his eyes were red, his suit rumpled, as if he had been keeping a desperate vigil. He dropped the flowers on a chair and collapsed to his knees by my bed, just as I knew he would. Alara. Oh, God. Alara. He grabbed my hand. I had to force myself not to recoil. His touch felt like ice. Baby, I am so sorry. He sobbed, pressing my hand to his forehead. The tears were convincing. They streamed down his handsome face. I was in shock. I froze. I saw you fall, and I couldn't move. He looked up, his eyes wide with practiced anguish. That woman, Sophie, she's a monster. She's sick. Alara, she's crazy. I've already fired her. I'm pressing charges myself. I told the police everything. I'm going to make sure she rots in jail for what she did to you, to us. He then, right on cue, glanced at my stomach. The baby, he whispered, his voice cracking. They told me the baby is okay. Is our baby okay? I stared at him. My mother's instructions had been simple. You are a victim. You are broken. The concussion has stolen your memory. But most importantly, you are scared. He must believe you are scared of her, not him. I flinched when he squeezed my hand. I let my eyes stay wide and unfocused. Julian, I whispered. My voice was weak, scratchy. I'm here, baby. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. I don't. I let my voice trail off, let a single tear roll down my temple. It's fuzzy. I don't remember. I felt it. A minuscule, almost imperceptible release of tension in his grip. He was still holding me tight, but the desperation was gone. What do you remember? He asked, his voice now a gentle, soothing caress, the voice of a predator calming its prey. I remember dinner, I whispered, focusing on the ceiling. The wine, Sophie. She was angry. Her blouse. I looked at him, trying to inject pure, primal fear into my gaze. She was screaming. We were outside. It was so loud. I closed my eyes. I just remember falling. The lights. The yellow lights. I just remember falling. I was so scared. I did not mention his words. I did not mention him leaning over me. I did not mention, you deserved this. He visibly relaxed, his shoulders, which had been tight with performative grief, settled. He thought the concussion had done him a favor. He thought my trauma was his shield. He truly believed his only problem was Sophie, his rogue accomplice. Shh, he soothed, stroking my hair. It's over. It was a horrible assault. Sophie just snapped. I never saw it coming. He leaned in, kissing my forehead. I'll handle everything. You just rest. You and the baby. That's all that matters. I love you, Alara. I love you so much. He believed he was safe. He and Sophie, who was currently being questioned by the police, believed the entire narrative was about a violent shove. They thought Julian was just a witness, a grieving husband whose crazy mistress had finally gone too far. They were fighting a battle on one simple front. They had no idea that my mother had already opened a second, devastating one. As Julian cried his fake tears, I thought about my mother. She was a federal judge. She would never, ever compromise her position by interfering in a local criminal assault investigation. That was messy, public, and, as she would say, beneath her. She wasn't interested in the criminal case. She was interested in the money. While Julian was busy orchestrating his alibi, my mother had been on the phone. She hadn't called the police commissioner. She had called a number in Switzerland. She had hired the Kratos Group. They were a myth in most financial circles, the people you called when a rogue nation-state tried to empty your treasury. They were not lawyers. They were forensic accountants, ex-intelligence data miners, and corporate raiders. They were, in my mother's words, the cleaners. They specialized in dismantling empires, finding every hidden dollar, and exposing every dirty secret. While Julian was in my room, worrying about Sophie's assault charge, the Kratos Group was already descending, silently and invisibly, on Aetherius Ventures. They were already unwinding the fraud of Serpentis Holdings. They were already analyzing the $10 million life insurance policy. Julian thought he was managing a public relations crisis. He had no idea my mother had just declared total financial war. Julian's visits became a sickening daily routine. He'd arrive with fresh juice, complaining about the police, about Sophie's incompetent lawyer, about the stress of it all. He was the victim. I was his audience, and I played my part, remaining fragile, confused, and, most importantly, amnesiac about the crucial details. "I just can't believe she did it. Alara," he'd say, shaking his head, his face a mask of sorrow. "To think we trusted her." I'd nod, whispering, "It's so scary, Julian." The moment his footsteps receded down the hall, the real work resumed. My mother's evening visits were not for comfort. They were for strategy. "The Kratos group is inside," she announced 3 nights after the attack. She sat in her usual chair, the picture of judicial composure, but her eyes were bright with the hunt. "They are as good as their reputation. They found Serpentis Holdings in under an hour." "And Sophie?" I asked, my voice still hoarse. "Sophie was just the first layer," my mother said dismissively. "Her payout was sloppy. The real money wasn't stopping with her. Kratos traced the primary outflows from Serpentis. Julian was moving 7-figure sums, routed through 3 countries to pay off 2 specific foreign officials in West Africa." My blood ran cold, colder than it had in the street. "He's bribing them." "For mining rights," she confirmed. "He's been using Etherius as a front to secure mineral contracts, a massive violation of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. This isn't just corporate embezzlement, Ilara. This is a federal crime. This is the kind of case that makes FBI careers." She let that sink in. He wasn't just trying to steal my trust fund. He was building a criminal enterprise. "But there's more," she continued, her voice hardening. "He needed that money for a reason. Kratos ran a full audit on the Etherius investment portfolios. Julian hasn't had a profitable quarter in almost 2 years." I stared at her. "But the dividends, the investor reports, all fake. He's been paying his original investors with money from his new ones. It's a classic Ponzi scheme. Etherius Ventures is hollow. It's bankrupt." I processed this. The gala. The phase 2. The desperation. "Schmidt and Wagner," I whispered, the pieces clicking into place. They weren't important investors he was trying to woo. They were his next victims. He was trying to get them to sign, to pour in fresh cash so he could pay his other investors and keep the whole thing from collapsing. "Exactly," my mother said, "which makes them his biggest marks." I finished. "They're not his allies. They're victims. They are currently 2 very terrified, very powerful victims." My mother said, "Kratos has already made an anonymous data drop to their lawyers. As of this morning, Schmidt and Wagner are aware that their combined $90 million investment has vanished. They are also aware that they are the primary witnesses in a violent felony investigation. They are panicked. They're worried about their money, and they're worried about legal exposure for being associated with Julian." She paused, then added, "I arranged a private meeting with them, in my chambers, an hour ago. I could picture it. The 2 powerful Chicago billionaires, suddenly small, sitting across the imposing desk from federal judge Isabella Reyes. I explained their position to them," my mother recounted, her voice flat, as if reading a verdict. "I told them, 'Gentlemen, let's be perfectly clear about your situation. You are 2 things. First, you are the victims of a catastrophic fraud. Julian Price has stolen your money. You will likely never see it again." She said she let them absorb that, the color draining from their faces. Then I continued. "Second, you are the only 2 disinterested eyewitnesses to the attempted murder of my daughter. You saw Julian's partner shove a pregnant woman into traffic. You heard her shriek, and you saw the man who stole your money crouch over her bleeding body and whisper in her ear. You saw no shock on his face, no panic. You saw approval." She leaned forward in her chair, reenacting the moment for me. I offered them a choice. You can be his accomplices, or you can be his victims. You can be the men who were duped, or you can be the men who stood by and did nothing. What did they say? I breathed, my ribs aching. They are businessmen, my mother said with a thin, cold smile. They chose the deal. The deal. They will cooperate, fully. They are turning over every email, every text message, every wire transfer, every dinner receipt they have ever exchanged with Julian Price. They are feeding the Kratos Group everything. They will help us build the definitive, inescapable financial case against him. In exchange, they will be positioned as what they are, victims of fraud. And, when the time comes, they will be the prosecution's star witnesses for the criminal case. She stood up, adjusting the sleeve of her suit. The board has been set, Alara. Those 4 witnesses. They've chosen their sides. 2 are criminals, backed into a corner, and 2 have just become our most powerful assets. I was discharged from the hospital a week after the attack, but I didn't go home. I went to a secure, private wing of my mother's residence, under 24-hour medical supervision. But to Julian, I was still the broken, fragile bird in the gilded cage of Mount Sinai. He had been visiting me less. My mother's legal team had informed him that my recovery required minimal stress, which was a polite way of barring him. But his calls, which I was advised to take, became more frequent and more agitated. He wasn't the grieving husband anymore. He was the stressed executive. "Alara, the investors are panicking," he'd say, his voice tight. "This whole thing with Sophie, it's a legal nightmare. The police are poking around Etheris. It's creating a liquidity crisis." He was laying the groundwork. I knew what was coming. The Kratos Group had already flagged his financials. The Ponzi scheme was crumbling. He was out of cash. He needed a massive injection. He needed my trust. He finally arrived for a critical visit, pushing past my mother's lawyer who was, of course, present in the room. Julian didn't even bother with flowers this time. He was all business, his face pale and drawn. He was a rat in a trap, and he was starting to chew his own leg off. "Ilara, thank God," he said, skipping the pleasantries. He turned to Mr. Harrison, my mother's lawyer. "I need a moment alone with my wife. It's a private family matter." "That won't be possible, Mr. Price," Harrison said, his voice like polished granite. "Mrs. Price's doctors have stipulated I must be present to monitor her stress levels during all visitations." Julian shot him a look of pure hatred, but he was trapped. He turned back to me, forcing his voice into a tone of false intimacy. "Honey, we're in trouble. This Sophie situation. It's a disaster. She's crazy. Her lawyers are making noise. They're going to try and sue Etheris. They're going to say the company is liable for her. Breakdown." He paced the room. "They're threatening to file injunctions. They're going to try and freeze our assets. Alara, all of our assets, the penthouse, the company, even your trust." He was a terrible liar when you knew the truth. They can do that," I asked, widening my eyes, letting my voice tremble. My trust." "They can try," he said, seizing the opening. "They can tie us up in court for years. We'd be ruined. We'd lose the penthouse. We'd lose everything, right before the baby comes." He stopped, knelt by my bed, and took my hand. His was clammy. "But I found a way to protect us, to protect our family." He pulled a thick sheaf of documents from his briefcase. "It's a simple restructuring. My lawyers drew it up. We're just moving the primary assets from your trust into a new, consolidated family fund. It's just a name change, really. But it puts them beyond the reach of any lawsuit. It makes them untouchable. It saves us." He fanned the papers out on the bed. "I just need your signature, to protect us. To protect our baby." I looked at the documents, then at him. I let a tear fall. "Julian, I don't understand any of this. It's so much." You don't have to, baby, he whispered, his impatience barely concealed. That's my job. I'm protecting you. Just sign here and here for our family. I picked up the pen. I looked at Mr. Harrison, who remained impassive. I looked at Julian. Anything for our family. Julian. My hand shook as I signed the 3 pages he indicated. He snatched them up, his relief so profound it was almost giddy. You did the right thing, Alara. You did the right thing. I'll take care of everything now. I'll fix this. He kissed me, a dry, triumphant peck on the forehead, and practically ran from the room. When the door closed, I looked at Mr. Harrison. He looked down at his notepad. The documents Mr. Price presented were, of course, a forgery, Harrison said, his voice flat. The ones he has in his hand are meaningless. And the ones I signed, I asked. Those, Mr. Harrison said, permitting himself a fractional smile, were the real ones, prepared by my office. Julian, in his greed, hadn't even looked at the pages. He had just seen a signature line. He thought I was signing control over to him. What I had actually signed was the gross moral breach affidavit. It was a kill switch my mother had built into the trust charter when I married him. It stated that I, Alara Reyes, had been presented with irrefutable proof compiled by the Kratos Group that my husband, Julian Price, had engaged in fiduciary misconduct, criminal conspiracy, and actions that constituted a direct threat to my life and the well-being of my heir. My signature, which he had just celebrated, did not give him my money. It severed him from it, completely, irrevocably. As of that moment, he had no spousal rights, no advisory access, no claim to a single dollar. He was, legally and financially, a stranger. Meanwhile, my mother's team had been monitoring his other negotiations. While he was telling me he was saving our family, he was on the phone with Sophie's lawyer. He was promising her the world. She'll take a plea, we heard him say. In a recording Kratos provided, aggravated assault, level 2. She was distraught. Tell her I'll make it right. $5 million. The moment this is settled, I'll wire $5 million to any account she wants. She just needs to take the plea, to protect the company, to protect us. He had no intention of paying her. Kratos had found the final piece of his plan just that morning. He wasn't trying to save the company. He wasn't planning on a future with Sophie. Julian Price had booked a one-way first-class ticket to the Cayman Islands, departing in 2 days. He was planning to drain my trust, leave Sophie to rot in prison, and flee the country with every last cent. He had just signed his own arrest warrant, and he thought it was a victory. I was not there to see it. Of course. My mother and her team had me secured, monitored, and resting, but I was given a full, play-by-play report. The Kratos Group had operatives everywhere, and my mother was a firm believer in the value of battlefield intelligence. The collapse began at exactly 10 a.m. Julian, flush with the victory of my signature, walked into the private wealth management division of J.P. Morgan Chase. He wore his best suit, the charcoal gray one he always called his closing suit. He was smiling. He believed that in 10 minutes, he would be liquid, a multimillionaire ready to flee the country. He sat down with the branch manager, a man he had golfed with. He passed over the forged documents, the ones he believed gave him full discretionary control. I need to authorize a wire transfer, he said smoothly. My wife and I are restructuring our assets, a full liquidation of the trust, moving to a new offshore entity. The manager, I was told, looked physically ill. Mr. Price, the manager said, refusing to meet his eyes. I'm afraid I cannot authorize that transfer. There's a hold on the account. Julian's smile didn't just fade, it cracked. A hold. What are you talking about? I have the signed authorization right here. The hold supersedes that. Julian, the manager said, dropping the professional demeanor. The entire Reyes family trust was frozen by court order at 9 a.m. this morning. It's locked. Nothing in, nothing out. On whose authority? Julian demanded, his voice rising. On the authority of the trust's protector, Judge Isabella Reyes, the manager said, finally looking up. The order cites overwhelming evidence of gross fiduciary misconduct, attempted fraud, and spousal breach of trust. Julian, the Kratos operative reported, went ashen. He had not just been denied, he had been named. The very papers he'd delivered, the ones he thought were his key, had been the final piece of evidence my mother needed to execute the kill switch. He had hand-delivered his own indictment. He stormed out of the bank, stumbling onto the sidewalk on Park Avenue. His hands were shaking. He did what any cornered rat would do. He tried to contact his partner. He dialed Sophie Keller, but Sophie couldn't answer his call. At that exact moment, she was sitting in a windowless interrogation room at the Midtown North Precinct. She hadn't been arrested. She had been invited, believing she was there to finalize the details of her low-level assault plea. But when she and her lawyer arrived, a detective had slid a manila envelope across the table. This was messengered to us, Ms. Keller, marked for your attention. Maybe you should look at it before we discuss your plea. The package was, naturally, anonymous, a gift from the Kratos Group. Inside, Sophie found 2 items. The first was a printout of a flight itinerary, first class, New York to Grand Cayman, one way, departing the next day. It was for a single passenger Julian Price. The second item was a set of bank statements from a private, encrypted account in Zurich. It showed a series of recent transfers, the last dregs of Etheris's liquid cash, the money Julian had promised her. He was moving it all into his own name. He wasn't paying her $5 million. He wasn't taking her with him. He was leaving her behind to face an attempted murder charge while he fled the country with everything. The detectives told my mother that the change was instantaneous. The blood drained from Sophie's face, and her calculated composure evaporated, replaced by a white-hot, venomous rage. The betrayal was absolute. "That bastard," she whispered. "Does this change things for you, Ms. Keller?" the detective asked. Sophie looked up, her eyes no longer the eyes of a lawyer, but of a woman scorned. "Get a stenographer. Get a camera. I'm changing my statement. All of it." She threw Julian under the bus, backed it up, and ran him over again. "He told me to do it," she declared, her voice ringing with newfound conviction. "Julian ordered me to solve the Alara problem." Those were his words. He said the pregnancy was a complication that would lock up the trust. He said, "Make it look like an accident." Sophie. "Push her. I'll handle the rest." He promised me half of everything. At the exact same time Sophie was confessing, and Julian was frantically trying to call her from the sidewalk. My mother's second front opened. Mr. Schmidt and Mrs. Wagner, the 2 investors from Chicago, were holding an emergency press conference in the lobby of their New York hotel. A Kratos operative had a live feed streaming to my hospital room. I watched, my heart pounding, as Mrs. Wagner, looking stern and outraged, stepped up to the microphone. "We are here today," she announced, "to declare that we are the lead plaintiffs in a massive lawsuit against Etheris Ventures and its founder, Julian Price. We, along with dozens of other investors, have been the victims of a sophisticated, multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme. Julian Price has defrauded us, and we will see him brought to justice." Julian's phone, which was probably blowing up with news alerts, was now useless. His accomplice was gone. His money was gone. His reputation was, in that instant, vaporized. He started to run. He just ran, blindly, down the street, a man with no future. He didn't get far. As he reached the corner, a black sedan pulled up, blocking his path. 2 men stepped out. They were not NYPD. Their suits were too clean, their demeanor too federal. "Julian Price," the first agent said. It wasn't a question. The Kratos Group's report on the FCPA violations, the bribery of foreign officials, had been on the U.S. Attorney's desk since dawn. Julian stopped, cornered, his chest heaving. You are under arrest by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I walked into the federal courthouse 6 months later, not as a victim, but as the final witness for the prosecution. I had healed. My ribs no longer ached. The concussion's fog had long since lifted. And my daughter, my beautiful, perfect daughter, had been born 2 months prior, healthy and screaming with a set of lungs that I already knew would rival my mother's. Julian was at the defense table. He was a ghost. The charm had been sand-blasted away, leaving only a hollow, desperate shell. He was facing a wall of charges: federal wire fraud, conspiracy, multiple violations of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, and, thanks to Sophie, solicitation and conspiracy to commit murder. His lawyer, a hired gun who clearly knew his client was guilty, tried the only defense he had to paint me as an unstable, hysterical, scorned woman. Mrs. Reyes, he said, his voice slick with false sympathy. Isn't it true you were distraught that evening, that you had, by your own admission, just learned of your husband's infidelity? I had, I said, my voice clear and steady. The entire courtroom was silent. Isn't it true you flew into a rage, that you ran screaming from the restaurant, causing a scene? I was upset. Yes, I was yelling. So was Ms. Keller. So it's entirely possible, Mrs. Reyes, he leaned in, that in your highly emotional state, 5 months pregnant, you simply lost your footing. You stumbled, you tripped, and you fell into the street. Isn't that what happened? I turned my gaze from him, past the jury, and landed it directly on Julian. He flinched, looking down at his hands. No, I said, I did not fall. I was pushed. That's your perception, he snapped. It is my reality, I said. But the assault is not the most important thing that happened on that sidewalk. The prosecutor stood. Mrs. Reyes, please tell the court what happened after you were struck by the taxi. I kept my eyes on Julian. He was forced to look up. I was on the pavement. I was bleeding from my head. I was in agony, and my only thought was that I was losing my child. My husband did not call for help. He did not run to my side. He walked calmly off the curb. He crouched down next to my head, and he whispered to me. Objection, the defense lawyer yelled. Inflammatory hearsay. It is a direct admission from the defendant, counsel, the judge said, his voice like thunder. Overruled. Continue, Mrs. Reyes. What did your husband whisper to you? Alara. He leaned in close, while I was bleeding on the asphalt, and he said, I told you not to get in the way. You deserved this. A sound rippled through the gallery. Julian's face was white. He was wrong, I continued, my voice ringing with absolute certainty. I wasn't the only one who heard him. My mother wasn't the only one I told. There were 4 witnesses on that sidewalk. 4 people saw him. 2 of them, Mr. Schmidt and Mrs. Wagner, have already testified to his cold, calm, demonic behavior. And the other 2, I said, turning my gaze, are in this courtroom today. Julian Price. And Sophie Keller. Schmidt and Wagner had been devastating witnesses. They confirmed Julian's utter lack of humanity. That, they testified, was why they had turned on him. The fraud was business. His coldness was evil. But Sophie was the executioner. In exchange for a lighter sentence, she had given the prosecution the one thing that buried Julian completely. She had, in her paranoia, secretly recorded several of their planning sessions. The prosecutor played the final recording. The courtroom filled with Julian's voice, captured on a phone 2 weeks before I was hit. The pregnancy is a serious problem. Soph, it complicates the trust. It locks her mother in. We need to solve the Alara problem, permanently. There was a pause. Then Sophie's voice, tinny and sharp. What exactly are you suggesting, Julian? I'm suggesting you make it look like an accident, a fall down the stairs, a mugging. I don't care. Just make it happen. The verdict was a formality. Guilty. On all counts, Julian Price was sentenced to 40 years in a federal penitentiary, no possibility of parole. Sophie Keller, for her cooperation and the tape, received 7 years for aggravated assault and conspiracy. I didn't stay to watch them lead Julian away. I stood, smoothed my suit, and walked out of the courtroom, past the explosion of flashbulbs and shouting reporters. I didn't look back. The view from my office now is of the park. It's not Julian's old office. That hollow empire was dismantled, its assets seized to pay back the investors I could find. This office is new, smaller, cleaner, and built on a foundation of truth. I'd salvaged what I could and founded a new firm, Aurora Ethical Capital. I looked up as the door opened. My mother, Isabella, walked in, not as a judge, but as a grandmother. She smiled, that rare, warm smile reserved only for me. I finished rocking the bassinet next to my desk. My daughter, Aurora, slept peacefully. "You did well, Alara," my mother said. I looked down at my daughter, my miracle, and then back at the city. I smiled. We're just getting started. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're listening from, so please drop a comment below and let's share our thoughts. Make sure you subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and if you want more stories like this to be heard, please hit that hype button to support the channel.